Hello and welcome to the Character Illustration for Film, Part 1. My name is Maciej Kuchara, and over next almost 2 hours, I'm going to talk about how to create an illustration, character illustration, or a keyframe, if you will, for the film. But those techniques that I'll be showing, as well as some of the ideas I'll be talking about, are also useful for character design for video games or illustration for books and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty broad subject, but I'll be mainly focusing on the film aspect. So I hope you're gonna enjoy it, and let's get going. All right. So first thing I usually like to do before I design my characters is I want to create some sort of environment for what's gonna be happening in the image, and there's several ways you can approach it. There's generally several ways in which you can start working, whether it's painting, photo bashing, or starting with 3D. Um, for this tutorial, I decided to go with photo bashing, and matter of fact, most of this tutorial will focus on that very technique. Reason being is that when you work in production environment, quite often you'll have a limited amount of time for creating your designs, and your picture or your design that you're going to be focusing on, it's going to be more important that you design several ideas, or you illustrate several ideas, or come up with something cool within a quite short amount of time. And then if you get it efficient enough, then you can create a few ideas within a day of work, and that's usually the way you're going to be working in production environment, especially in film, where it's pretty fast paced, and you might not care about the way things look aesthetically, but more about what the design is. So that's one reason for which I'm trying to kind of show you how to approach this by photo bashing everything. Um, the photo bashing is pretty much a technique that you are using photography and textures to kind of collage everything together, and then you paint over with brushes, and that's how you get your images done. Now it's probably the fastest technique to work with, mainly because the textures coming from the photos are already presenting some sort of good amount of detail and good definition on what's going on in your image. Whereas if you would have to paint everything from scratch, you would have to spend quite extra amount of time to get that amount of detail. One of the biggest advantages of using photos in your design is you help yourself with the lighting tremendously, because the photo itself will suggest the lighting of your scene, but also you're helping yourself with details, and oftentimes actually you might end up having some good detail suggestions that come from the photos and overpaints. Um, so, for instance, for this tutorial, I decided to paint a character that has been pinned against the car. It's almost like smashed into the side of a car. Um, and if I was to paint this from scratch without using any photos, then it would just take me way more time than by just taking a photography of a crashed car and just putting some paint strokes on top, and maybe changing colors and whatnot, and that way you're getting crushed car in a matter of minutes, instead of spending quite a few moments and trying to render image enough so that when you look at it, you can understand what that is. So basically, that would be one of the main reasons I would suggest working that way. Also, another reason for you choosing photo bashing technique over painting technique is that the image I'll be presenting to you would be a sort of concept or illustration that you would do generally during a pre-production, or when you're coming up with ideas that are related to script, or things like that. So one one thing to distinguish before we start talking in detail about character design is to make sure that you understand the difference between production and pre-production. Pre-production is usually when you're supposed to come up with good ideas to sell the product and make it appealing to investors. So, for instance, in the film environment, pre-production would be just to prepare the script and illustrate some of the ideas that are behind the script, so that the producers or studio execs, just generally the people that will have to pay or throw money on that film, will see potential in visuals. So just basically helping the script, helping to visualize the way the film would look like, the way the script would look like. Same goes to video games, where pre-production itself will help to get you understand what the game is going to look like in just a matter of having a few concepts done. Nicely rendered concepts will definitely kind of set some kind of benchmark to what the studio might want to do in terms of technology and all that stuff. So that would be the pre-production, and then when the project goes into production, then that means you're actually producing assets to the film or to the game, so that they can be used to create the product. So in film, production would be designing environments and sets. For instance, if you would have part of the script that happens in the city, or let's say if part of the script happens in the alley, and maybe you would have scouts from the film finding place where it's going to be filmed, and then you would have to sort of like expand on the specific area that already exists, or maybe you would have to design a set that would later be built. And same goes to characters, where you would be creating either a costume for a character, if that's a human character or a humanoid character. You would be painting a costume that later on can be created, or you would be painting a character that can be created entirely in CG later on, or by just creating props and attaching it to an actor. So that's basically the biggest difference between production and pre-production. Obviously, there are other differences that I don't want to go too deep into, because this is not the focus of this video. Also, it's not a rule. Sometimes you will have to mix it up, and oftentimes I found myself doing keyframes and sketches and all that stuff during the production, and quite a few times on a few projects I had to create more detailed sort of look on the characters and variations, even though the project was in the pre-production. So it's not a rule, it's not a rule, but basically something that you will find happening quite often, where the distinction is pretty obvious, and outside of specific, just a very specific situation, you will have it that It's more about the way the image looks in pre-production, and it's more about how it functions in production. So quickly coming back to what we're doing here, the main idea I have behind this project is I figured out that the easiest way to sort of talk about character design for film would be to have a project that could be a film. Um, and there is one project I'm working on specifically. It's my original IP called Showtime. And it's futuristic, sort of sci-fi, cyberpunk, that is sitting almost in very retro, sort of 80s look, if you will. So when you think Showtime, you're thinking Blade Runner, you're thinking Akira, you're thinking Armitage, you're thinking Ghost in the Shell, and also books like Neuromancer or Mona Lisa Override. So that's basically the source of inspiration for that project. And I figured out it would be cool to show you what the illustration, character illustration, could be for a project like that. And just few words of what the Showtime world is. It's basically a world that is dominated by androids or replicants, however you want to call them. They are actually outnumbering humans, and humans are actually just being a small part of a society, almost like a dying breed, a dying species, almost, if you will. And those are the guys that are being actually hunted by androids, and there's a warfare going on. It's just like, there's just a lot of things related to it, to the subject. I don't want to spill too many beans about what the story could be like. What I can tell is that it's just a number of different stories, different short stories that are related to number of characters. So for this, I was thinking to choose one of the characters. It's going to be a female android, and the way I'll show you I'll try to explain how to work on it would be to sort of go through a design process like I would go through if I was working for this project, even if it was an actual film. So as I was saying, I started with the environment, and the reason being is because this is supposed to be sort of keyframe looking broad stroke of the character without focusing too much on the design of the character. I always try to start with the environment so that I have already some information in it. One and the most major information that I always focus on is the lighting, because once the lighting is set in my scene, then I can focus more on colors, and obviously lighting and colors are intertwined, and good lighting will usually sell the image pretty well. And once you make a decision on what the lighting is, it's going to be easier to work on this entire thing. Also, another reason is that once I have my environment, I can also have a good information, or it will help me to work on my character design in a way that the environment itself will suggest what kind of world it is. So obviously I know that this is supposed to be cyberpunk, that there should be some influence coming from films like Blade Runner, or Akira, or Armitage, or Ghost in the Shell. I know that I want to have some colors that almost scream like 80s, and Sid Mead, and all the juicy stuff that you used to see in the film, and in magazines and TV in 80s. So that's the basic color idea that I have for this image. But just having some sort of environment also will help me to uh, not only inform me on the lighting, but also it will help me to get the good idea what the story behind this illustration is. One thing that is quite important when you're creating a keyframe is the story of what is supposed to happen in that keyframe. So in many occasions, this is going to be coming from the script or description that you get from the director or your production designer or your art director. Um, so that's already set. But you still might have some visual freedom of how you're going to approach this whole scene and how it's going to affect the design of the character. So for that reason, once you have environment, it's just pretty simple for you to understand what story you want to tell and like what things in your character design you will have to focus on, and what also what kind of details you might have to look into closer if there is a specific situation in your image. So, for instance, we have this Android character, female character, that is crashed into a car. Let's say the scene could be that she's fighting someone who's way stronger, and that person or that robot or whatever that is throws her through the air and right onto that passing car. And the impact, because she's built from metal inside, the impact itself and how heavy her character is because of the components she's made of, just creates a lot of destruction around her. Thus, the broken car or almost wrecked car. But also, once you have that information, you might also want to think about, hey, so if she's damaging the car, she probably will have some scratches or damages on the body as well. So that's the thinking process of what you would have to think about when working on that kind of image and your character design. One more thing that your environment or the way that your environment looks like present itself and how it'll affect the character or your entire image almost is not only just lighting but also color choices. So, for instance, um, I've decided to go with the deep blue, deep saturated blue color for the background to kind of give it the 80s Sid Mead Blade Runner kind of feeling, like very saturated, almost neon-like colors that's gonna be appearing in that image. Now, having that blue color, I'll want to make sure that there is some kind of yellow aspect in my painting, some kind of a yellow color creeping in, just to balance the colors and create the nice hue contrast. As you know, when you contrast colors from the color wheel, you're helping your image with the you're helping yourself with creating image that is balanced in terms of color, because those two colors are the most contrasty. They will not only will create more contrast in your image overall, but also it will just balance itself and help you not to create illustration that will have weird kind of color palette, or that will have weird color balance, or it will be monochromatic and whatnot. So one of the aspects of why having some kind of background information could be important for your character design. One thing also, I'm kind of jumping around with several ideas of what I'm talking about. One thing that I wanted to mention almost from the get-go is I'll try to cover some of the techniques that I'm using for this painting, but the majority of the talk I will do over next uh, almost 2 hours. It's gonna be more design related, and I'll kind of be expressing more of the ideas that are behind character illustration in film, rather than just going through every single click in the video and explaining what those uh, what those techniques are. Um, so, with that being said, one thing that I like to do, and that makes the whole process much easier and faster, is obviously going with the photo textures and sort of kind of collaging everything together, and putting parts of the textures that I find useful into your image, and like stitching it together, almost like building the image from parts. And almost thinking like you get a bunch of Legos, and you're supposed to create a design out of it. So you'll just pick and choose which part from which set of Legos will work for your specific design. So that's pretty much the way I approach quite substantial amount of designs in when I work for film. Another point, because the technique itself almost it almost makes it mandatory for you to have a good library of photos. Um, Sometimes you'll find that you might actually have your own photography, whether it's from travel, or you're just carrying your camera around, and you're finding a good amount of places that you're visiting, and you're taking photos, and you're building your own library of things. But quite often, actually, you'll find yourself not having the luxury of having a exact specific texture that you want to use, or you want to have for this design, and you want to help yourself with making sure everything is done faster and whatnot. So um, for that, it just there is no other way but just using Google, and going through a process of searching photography. The way I research my photos for the designs is I think about the subject of the image. So if it's a cyberpunk, or if it's a scene like this, for example, where we have a wrecked car and female character, the first thing I will think about is what are the environment elements that I need to have. So wrecked car. Then what's the character elements that I will want to have? Female character. Is she gonna be dressed or not? How well she's gonna be dressed? What kind of material is gonna be used? You just kind of create yourself a list of things that you have in your mind. You don't have to write it down. You can just have it in your head. It's not that complicated that you have to write everything down. But just have some of that list somewhere in your head, so that once you start collecting your references, you know exactly what to search for. Because think about it this way: when you're spending time on searching references, you're actually spending time working, and uh, your supervisor, when he'll be looking at your work, he will not be looking at your references in the first place. He'll want to see your design first. So even though you're putting time into research, it's essentially sort of wasted time unless you find specific photo references that are so inspiring that you want to like impress your director, or production designer, or art director, or producer, or whoever you're working with. You're generally your supervisor. But then again, it's just very minimal part of what you're actually going to be doing. So finding references, important, but you have to do it efficiently so you're not wasting time on just searching and searching and searching, and 2 hours later you're not even close to having a library of things that you're going to need for this image. So for this illustration, for this tutorial, um, the way I was thinking about research, the way I was thinking about the image itself, I wanted to create a female cyborg, and I had several ideas in my mind, but for the very first tutorial, I figured let's go with something very simple in terms of design. Let's talk about how this thing is built, and then in the later tutorials that I'll be releasing shortly after, I'll be talking about doing design changes based on the feedback from your supervisor, and then rendering your quick design. Because essentially, what we're doing here is just going to be a concept sketch, character concept sketch, or character concept keyframe, or however you want to call it. But basically, just creating something simple and not spending too much time in going into very specific of how everything is going to be designed. So, you know what? I just look at the films that I really liked, and the anime that I really liked, and one character that was striking me with like the coolness factor that would work for this illustration was Armitage. So when you just look at the final illustration, the resemblance is very similar. So I wanted to start with something very simple like that, just to show you how to build a character with the photo bashing technique, and then later on in the next video I'll show you how to redesign and change materials and whatnot. So I had in mind that character. Next thing was to find references. So I was thinking leather pants, baggy leather pants, female characters, and there's several ways you can find those. Cosplay is usually a very good idea because you get posed characters. There are several options in terms of stock photography on DeviantArt, and generally just Google search. That's probably the easiest because then you can specify your search terms, and you're researching almost entire web. So that's how I approach it. So I was thinking suspenders, leather pants. Those would be the keywords I would be searching for. Cosplay or female character, just very basic words, and just finding a right amount of photo reference. One thing I focus when I search for the references is I make sure that I search for a right resolution. So I'm not gonna, unless there is a striking design or some cool ideas behind a specific reference, I'm not gonna save that reference if it's not high res enough. And by high res, I'm thinking 1200 or 1600 wide or tall. Something that is smaller than this usually is not going to be useful for my illustration. Reason being is when you do your illustration, you want to make sure, especially when you're doing stuff like this, you want to make sure that you're starting with good resolution. So that would be somewhere from 3,000-4,000 pixels wide or tall, depending if you're doing a widescreen or a portrait, and up. The main reason behind this is if you start with a low resolution and even by accident you come up with cool design, and your starting resolution, say, is 1,200 pixels, you're losing a lot of details, and all the work you're gonna put in painting over it and stitching together and whatnot gonna be lost because once you scale up your image to say 4,000-5,000 pixels, which is usually what you would want to send to your supervisor if you're working for film, or if you're doing illustration for a book, it might be even more. Or maybe you're doing an illustration that you want to sell later on as a print, and the larger it is, the bigger the print you can make. So it's usually good to have this 4,000 pixels done from the get-go. So this this is over 4,000 pixels for sure. So I will search for references that will be at least that size. Now, another thing, once I have my set of references, I also will look into actors or actresses, models, generally just faces, what kind of face I can have in my painting. In film, oftentimes you'll actually get a specific actor that will be cast to the film. So oftentimes when you'll be creating character designs or specific costume designs for a character or keyframes from the film, you will actually use the likeness of that character or of that actor that's going to be playing the role. And there's several projects I worked on, several films that I worked on, and one of the recent ones, which is directed by Alex Proyas, it's called Gods of Egypt. I was designing or helping to design some of the characters, as well as create keyframes for those characters, and I had to use, I got a list of the characters or the actors that are going to be in the film, and then I used that likeness to help to create those keyframes and make them almost look like they would be a screenshot or a screen grab from the film itself. So that's how it would work when you're researching faces, or if you actually get that from your supervisor. So once I have my set of references, I usually save it to a specific folder, and I make sure that they're labeled, or the folder, at least the folder that I'm having those references in, is labeled. Once I have that, then I can have an access to it. Like if I would work on a different keyframe, that would be somewhere like a different project, but it would be similar to an image that I worked on before. Then I can always go back to that specific image I remember I worked on, and just reuse some of the references, because you might just use different part of that specific reference. So that's how it. That's why it's important to kind of save it in the proper way so that it's easily accessible. So once I have that, once I have the idea for what's going to be in the image, once I create my sort of basic shapes of and basic lighting of what the environment is going to be like, and I'll start working on the character and posing character. And as you see right now, there's already some kind of pose information that I've managed to do during the time I was talking about different aspects, but just quickly help you to understand the thinking process here is, because I wanted her character to be crushed into a car, that would imply that she would be flying through the air, that there would be impact, and then she definitely wouldn't be standing, and what would be actually, or she wouldn't be lying, or just figuring out how this metal body would kind of conform itself around this car. And I figured what could be really interesting is that once she crashes in the car, her pose would almost look like she's sitting on the throne. So her shoulders would be more up, her arms would be spread apart, legs would be almost like scrambling up, so she would be almost like in this almost like sitting position, almost imagine that it would be like a huge chair uh, that has like the railing, or I I don't know how to call it, but I'm not a native English speaking guy, so there are some words that might be missing here. Sorry for that. But imagine that she would be sitting with her arms all the way up, and her head would be sort of leaning down, and she'll be almost like fuck. Just have to like scramble up, and like I'm gonna kick some ass right now. So that was the sort of major idea that I had how I would post the character. Um, and once you have that idea, it actually will help you to focus on finding better references that will help you to make the painting process even faster. Uh, Now, for obvious reasons, when you're working on a keyframe, or when you're working on a character design, or a sketch that is for pre-production like this one, or something similar to what you're seeing on the screen right now, you might not find a very specific pose that you would want to do for this image, or you might not find a model or reference or whatnot. So there are a few options. One is, if you have a friend, take a photo shoot of that friend. If that's not an option, another option that is not covered in this video, but something that I'll want to show you further on in the next videos, is creating a pose in 3D and lighting it in 3D, and then using photo textures to enhance the quality of your 3D pose. So that's something I'll talk about in different video. And here, what I'm doing is I'm sort of trying to imagine what the character pose will look like, and then I search through photography that I will find useful, and then think about again, this whole Lego thing, where you have pieces that you're putting together and stitching it together. So for my image, I knew I wanted to have pants and legs or boots that are in from almost the side or 45-degree angle, so I can use it in a proper way that's gonna work with the perspective that I had in mind. Same goes to how the chest and belly and neck would look like, and same goes to arms. Since I knew the arm's gonna be spread apart, almost in this throne sitting position, then I was looking for references where character would have raised arm, or pointing at something, where you can see the armpit and how the muscles are bending and all that. So that's a good way of thinking about the character and thinking about how to find references. Now, if you don't have that imagination, what you could do also that will help you to kind of imagine what certain textures you might want to search for is get yourself like a action figure or a doll, or like there's art dolls that are specific for artists that are used for like figure drawing. Any of those will work, where you can just where you have a control over joints, and just put it on your table. Your eyes is your camera, and you just look at that action figure posed, where you hold it in your hand, and you can just kind of imagine, all right, so that's the camera angle, my eyes are camera, that's where that's what kind of references I would need to look for. Again, the easiest way is to have someone and make a photo shoot, and I've been doing it quite a few times already on the projects I work on, especially at Naughty Dog, when me, John, and other guys or Eitan and Nick and Aaron and Alex and all the guys that work in in and around concept department, we would kind of like make photo shoots and pose in a weird way. And when you would walk by the office, you would see us almost doing stupid things, but in fact, we would just be posing for the character that we want to paint in our keyframe, or in a specific environment that we want to show. So that's probably the easiest way. Um, with time, once you have enough practice, you'll and once you have enough knowledge about anatomy and how body proportions work, it's going to be super easy for you to kind of quickly find good references and then kind of stitch it together to make your character. Um, Again, when I'm painting that, I'm kind of thinking about proportions, but I'm not going pixel perfect with it. Remember, this is just a sketch, and it's supposed to show the idea. It isn't supposed to be perfectly rendered. Um, One important aspect outside of the character design that is related to your environment, and just the keyframe or illustration in general, is how you frame it. And as you might have noticed already, I've been reframing the image a few times. And if you do it early on, it's really good, because then you can kind of find a good framing for your image without going too much with the details and then having empty areas that you will need to paint from scratch or overpaint, or kind of put a lot of effort to make it look like it belongs to the image. So reframing is good. You always want to kind of fiddle around your illustration until you get to a point you're like really happy with just the overall composition. One composition that I like to use quite a lot is the rule of thirds, which means basically that the center of my interest, or the point of interest in my image, will be on 1/3 of the illustration. So if you would cut your image into 3 pieces horizontally and 3 pieces vertically, and you would create those cutting lines, you want to make sure that your point of interest is where those lines intersect, in any point where those lines intersect. And once you use that rule, it's a pretty simple rule. You can Google it. It's called rule of thirds. Google it. It's a pretty simple rule that always works. It's been used for hundreds of years by painters, and they're obviously way smarter than me and anyone else, because they figured this shit out before. And why not using something that's already been figured out, instead of trying to come up with something that might necessarily not work or look weird. And also, your composition is extremely important. uh, if you compose an image that doesn't look good, or the composition doesn't work well, then no matter how good you're gonna go with the design, there's just gonna be something off about the image that will just make will make the perception of the illustration weaker, or it's not gonna give you the same impact as if your composition would be correct. So good composition, and then environment, and then your character with references and all that. So coming back to or looking at what we're doing here, and the ideas behind or the story behind the image. So as I mentioned, she's supposed to be cyborg, or android, or however you want to call it. She's fighting, obviously, someone, and because she's doing that, and what are the ways of showing that on your character? One of the obvious ways is just if she's an android or a non-human being with metal parts, let's just show some metal parts. And the easiest way, maybe her skin, or the material that is covering the internal parts of arms or something, or any other parts of the body, is totally damaged and destroyed. So, for instance, in our character, that would be hand. Her hand is totally like the skinning on her hand is totally destroyed. You can see wires sticking out. You can see a prosthetic arm. You can see metal parts and all the joints. Everything is kind of like exposed, and you see, holy shit, this is not a human being. Another thing which almost comes from looking at Armitage is how the skin could be layered. So when you research references and you think about design, you might find something in the specific reference that you might want to use in your image. And for instance, in for this character, the skin itself could be layered. I don't want to. I didn't want to put too much focus on showing or working on that layering. So I just changed the value of the skin in a specific area and sort of make the edges more jagged and looking like the skin is peeling off or something. So you can see that by looking at the darker spots on the skin. Now, one thing I'm doing quite a lot when I'm painting character designs or illustrations or keyframes is I like to kind of look at my layers, clean it up time to time. So when there's too many layers appearing, I'll delete some of them. I'll rearrange them if necessary, turn on and off to see how the changes I just painted affect the painting, and just to kind of inform myself which layer is for what. When I'm doing quick designs, that's not going to take me more than, say, 2 hours of painting, then I'm not going to focus that much on making sure that my file is well organized. But if I would work on an illustration that takes way longer and is more complicated, then I would start labeling layers and color coding layers and putting them in the groups so that I have more control over the general image. Another thing that I like to do a lot when doing character designs is because I like to paint them in the environment, which ultimately help to sell the design and purpose of that specific character, is I would kind of be jumping around from the background and the environment itself to a character design, and kind of making sure that everything in the illustration itself is sort of having a good balance in terms of detail. So, for instance, I'll repaint the door that looked too photo-y, and they were like too crumbled, and we're just creating too much contrast and noise around the character. So I would paint over that and create this little reflection. So I use just like a few brush strokes to create reflection around that area, and just showing that the material itself is more reflective. It's a car paint after all. So I'll kind of use those kind of techniques to make sure that everything, it's not too noisy, or there's not like the details that are in the specific area are not too distracting and whatnot. Also, what I'll do quite a lot is I'll spend some extra time in making sure that the background is a little more designed and a little it's not too generic. So because I wanted to have the cyberpunk feeling here, I'm putting just extra effort on how the vehicle that she's crashing into looks like. Um, Again, it's kind of important because it helps to sell the keyframe as the whole thing, and helps to kind of sell the design of the character as well. And also it makes the image much more pleasant to look at. So I'll kind of go back and forth. look at my environment, look at the character, see how those two balance between each other, then and kind of like do brush strokes and overpaints around some uh, adjustment layers that will help me to kind of balance the contrast and the values. Because the one thing that I want to be absolutely sure once I have my finished image is that the value balance is in check, that the details that are important, or my point of focus, which is the character, is the most detailed part, and everything around it, even though it might have quite a lot of details, it's still going to be tuned down and will not be as distracting, and kind of fighting for attention when you're looking at the specific painting. You will see that the changes that I'm doing for this image are helping with that. So, for instance, I first of all, I want to make sure that the lighting is in check. So the character lighting, which comes from photo references I research, is matching the the lighting that comes from my background. Um, when I'm introducing a sort of artificial color, which is, for instance, the blue tone that comes from the background, I want to make sure that this blue tone is spilling over in some areas of the image, and it because actually this color will reflect on reflective surfaces. So, for instance, the car is made of metal. The metal itself is a reflective surface. Now, because it's crumbled and depending on how it's painted, it might be matte or more shiny material. If it's more shiny material, then your reflection is going to be sharper. If it's more matte material, like in this situation, they're going to be more diffused and scattered and then softer. But still, the color itself will be affecting the way things look. Now, also what I do, just to sort of unify everything and make sure that nothing is sticking out too much in the areas that I don't want it to, is that I'll start creating adjustment layers and recolor the image in a way that makes it look or makes it feel exactly the way I want it to feel. There's two adjustment layers that I'm using for that most of the time. One is color balance and the second one is levels. So I'll use just those two adjustment layers to work the balance of the image and work the changes, increase or decrease the contrast, and make sure sort of things are presenting itself better after, say, a couple of minutes of fiddling around with those changes. And then clean up the image a bit again. So if there's reference that I don't want to use anymore, that is sitting somewhere in the layers, I'll kind of delete it and make sure that it's not there. If there's adjustment layers that is supposed to affect only specific objects, I'll link it to that specific objects. Also, one thing that I'm gonna do and make sure that is pretty clear is I want to make sure that all of my adjustment layers that are affecting entire image, whether it's adjustments or gradients or any kind of lighting additions that will kind of work on top of entire image, going to be grouped in layers and grouped in a group folder, which I'll usually call adjustments. And that way, if I turn it off, then I can turn off all of the adjustments and kind of work on the paint. You don't want to have your adjustment layers on when you're picking color and painting, because your color pick will be affected by the adjustment layers you have. So that's why it's more organized way of having things done, where you have your adjustment layers in the folder. What I'm doing now is putting some, again, extra work to the environment. I figured out that the car itself, it's really hard to read the way it looked until now, and the character design is almost there, because I wanted to be fairly simple for this tutorial. but still, the environment itself is affecting the way you look at the characters. I want to make sure that the environment reads well, and that when you look at it, you'll see, okay, this is a really fucked up car. The impact was pretty big, and you know, just wanted to be sure that everything kind of sits together. And I had several references for the destroyed car. I usually want to find more than just one reference, and then use a few of them, kind of combine them together. Not only it just helps you to create sharper details here and there, or make more unique details, but also it'll help you in a situation where your very specific photo reference might just not be enough. Um, so few references for my car, fixing some of the issues I had with the perspective. It didn't feel like the perspective was working that well. The camera on the character feels like a natural 50mm camera, whereas the camera on the vehicle felt like something that I would use on portrait would be 85mm or 100mm. So I wanted to kind of work on that a bit, and make the car kind of make the perspective foreshortening, so that it feels more deep. It doesn't feel so flat, and it works better with the character, and as a part of the environment. And once I get to sort of point where I'm happy with the things that I'm making, I'll kind of continue working on it on top of it. Again, going with some adjustment layers and trying to figure out um, what changes, or what overpaints, or which layers are still kind of viable to what I want to create, and which of them are actually not working that well. So for instance, I had this darkening layer. I think it was on multiply or darken, which was creating this red gradient. I felt it kind of didn't work too well because the character itself, she has those suspenders which are red, and I want your eyes to kind of go in that direction. And anywhere else I introduce red color, it's going to be taking your attention away, and diminishing the contrast or the effect of that, the color of those suspenders. So I changed that red color from sort of this fog that was overlaying the vehicle into more of a yellowish tone gradient that is kind of helping to balance, or kind of like create nice contrast that is framing the character, which is the contrast between the yellow and the blue color from the background. So that's one of the topics I was kind of mentioning before. Once you have your background, and you make some decisions in the background in terms of the colors and whatnot, that's where later on you can kind of like push it back a bit, and create some colors that will work nicely and balance the image nicely as well. But basically, what I'm trying to do is just to adjust, because at this point I'm getting really close to a composition that I'm sort of happy with, and a composition that kind of works for this character illustration and this keyframe. And from this point on, it's just going to be a game of doing adjustments, and changing little things, and doing overpaints, and reframing, and kind of going back and forth on elements of the foreground, character, background, just to make sure that the main principle is there, that the character is the major focus of this painting, and that everything that is around character still can be detailed, but it's not taking away from the focus. It's not kind of like taking your eye away from where your eye is supposed to go. And the easiest way of doing that is just to make sure that everything that is not in focus has either less contrast, less details, or is more neutral in color, or is monochromatic enough so that it just doesn't create striking contrast. When I'm talking contrast, by the way, is there, you have to distinguish two sort of uh, contrasts that you might have in your illustration. First is the contrast of value, and the second one is a contrast of hues. The contrast of values comes from what it really is, just contrasting values. So say black and white, and bright yellow, dark blue, bright whatever color, dark whatever color. Just basically a difference in value. So the higher the difference in value, the more contrast you're gonna create. Contrast of hues comes from literally just different hues, or hues that are on the opposite spectrum of the color wheel. And the way you use contrast is just to create line and shape. So contrast and value will create shapes. Contrast of hue will also create shapes. And also will help you to frame things. So for instance, in this illustration, because I've introduced yellow color to my side of the car, and then the blue color that is on the back of the car, and also how opposite they are in terms of where they are framed. There's more yellow hue on the car side, and then or on the one side of the character, and then there's more blue hues on the other side of the character, and that way your eye will kind of go between those two hues, and it'll kind of help you to lead your eye towards the character itself. So that's one of the ways I'll be using contrast, and one of the reasons I would kind of keep my background more neutral. So as you've noticed, the vehicle, for example, is generally I kind of decrease the amount of contrast of value you have. There's still slight color differences, which is fine, but they're not as saturated enough to create a striking contrast there. So all I'm doing here is kind of like balancing everything that is around character, making sure that it works together with the character. It's not taking the attention away. It's actually helping to frame the character and all that. Another thing you might notice when you watch closely the video, and actually when you watch the video and you kind of stop listening to my babbling about the process and all the design things and how I think about reference and all that, you'll see that during the whole process of painting, there are things that I'm just kind of experimenting with as well. So when I'm creating something quick, I'm trying not to spend too much time in terms of thinking if the choices I'm making at this time are good or wrong. I kind of want to experiment, and if something doesn't work out, I can always take it back or take it away or delete the layer or paint over it. So, for instance, you've seen the door of a car being something totally different before. I kind of painted over it and changed it a lot, just to make it fit to the painting more, and made it look more to something that I would be happy with. one of the reasons is it's just quicker way of working. And as I mentioned in the beginning, you want to make sure that you're creating several designs within a day and you have some options, because once you have options to choose from, uh, it's easier to work from there. Um, if you spend too much time on doing sketch, you will end up having something that uh, might be looking real good, but chances are is that your production designer or your supervisor uh, might just want something totally different than you've been delivering. Uh, so when you use the photo bashing technique, which is probably the fastest way of working, um, you can like create your designs real quick. It's just snap, 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 and you're just putting a few things together, and you already have something good to look at. You clean it up here and there, and like as in this video, it's playing in real time, so you can see that within an hour and 45 minutes, we have a sketch. It's maybe not as detailed as we would want it to be. It's maybe lacking some design choices that you might be more fancy about. Um, but it still kind of shows the idea that we wanted to show, which is the android being crushed in the car, and that lady is just she looks badass. She's gonna kick some ass. So we have just this basic idea there. Again, for this tutorial, I made it super simple. I just kind of based it off designs that I really liked from films that I really like, Armitage, for example. But I'll show you that once you have your composition, once you have your design in, it's so much easier to work from there and fix it and create iterations. Um, Whereas if you would spend entire day on one painting, you only have one idea to show, and unless you hit it on the mark from the get-go, you'll be in trouble, because in that time you could have made few ideas and make your time more efficient. Um, so yeah, it's just bouncing around and making sure that everything kind of works together nicely. Um, Again, I had my general design almost done within an hour, and then those extra 30-40 minutes I'm spending on the image is just cleaning it up, making sure it's presentable. It doesn't look like something that has been collaged and in a really fast and nasty way. You kind of still want to have the level of presentability and just something that just doesn't look ugly and uninspiring. Because again, like with any product, packaging is pretty important. You want to have your packaging sell your product and not work against the product. So design something in an hour and a half, and then spend that extra half an hour, or maybe even an hour, to clean it up, kind of add details and make sure it looks just nice, looks just good enough to go from there. Um, with the design or the character illustration we're doing here, it's gonna be super easy later on to change things around the character, change the outfit, maybe position of the hand or something like that. Because everything else is in place. If I start changing the outfit, for instance, I might just have to update several elements in my environment, but again, it's not going to be a major rework that's going to be happening there. Everything is pretty sketch-like anyways, so even if I paint on top, it's not going to take me forever to match the level of detail I already have in the painting. So quickly looking at the again technical aspect and readability and all that. So you've seen that I was cleaning it up a bit. I'm kind of trying to spend some time to overpaint the texture detail. So it might feel like it's counterintuitive to place a photo and then paint over it because you're actually losing a lot of details. But there are some details that we don't want to see in the image anyways. So for instance, the vehicle itself, we might at some point want to design parts of it, but this is not the illustration that will sell the design of the vehicle. So it can be left fairly loose. I'm overpainting for one major reason though, is that I wasn't happy with how much contrast the vehicle had and how much it was exposing the vehicle and how much attention it was taking away from the character. So I decided to, hey, you know what? Let's just put some brush strokes, make it look painterly, make it look like a more illustration-like almost, and just focus on the character instead. And you've seen, I've finished the or made the majority of character done fairly quick, so I could focus on even more on the environment, making sure that the character sits in the environment well. So it's casting in proper shadows around the vehicle. The shadows are following the form. There is a good lighting direction in general. So something that I've almost forgot to talk about in the beginning. Um, so basically, all those elements work as an illustration. It doesn't look like a quick chop job. It just looks something that you spend enough time on to be presentable and in nice packaging. Um, which reminds me, by the way, that yeah, I didn't talk about lighting and what were my choices in terms of how I light this scene. Um, so one thing I was thinking about, obviously I was already mentioning it a few times, is films like Blade Runner or Sid Mead paintings, or generally just looking at 80s and how the films were lit in the 80s and how this entire lighting works. One of the things that I've noticed, which is quite apparent in almost every film from the 80s, is that quite a few scenes, or if not most of them, are lit from the very strong directional light coming from the spotlight or whatnot. Almost, almost like if you think, well, maybe doing a reference of film noir is not as successful reference, but basically, look at Blade Runner or even films that are not specifically sci-fi, but like film like Tango and Cash, for instance. They have quite a lot of scenes where you have direct spotlight, which in when you look at your painting and you think about how this thing would look in real life, it probably wouldn't make any sense, because how in the hell you would put, where would this light be coming from, right? But that's not the point. The point is that you light your painting or your environment so that you bring your point of interest out from the whole mess that is that is your environment and everything around it. So the spotlight has been used to kind of like show you what's the point of interest in the composition. So in film, they would spotlight on the characters or on the specific areas to create contrast of values and make your eye go to the most contrasty area. So if the spotlight would go on a character, the background will be more neutral or almost darker, so that you would have a highest contrast where the character is. Or if the contrast or the spotlight would go behind the character, it would lit, for example, the wall or everything, and then your character would be maybe in the ambient light, and then you would see the silhouette of a character, and the contrast between the background and the foreground would be striking enough that your eye would go towards that character. So that's what I was thinking for this illustration as well. I was thinking, let's put the very strong spotlight almost hitting the character almost from the front. So imagine that it's a photo shoot. You have your cameraman with the huge lamp standing in front of her and spilling the light on her upper body and parts of the car. That way, lighting everything this way, what it does is creating the most contrast that I wanted around the character and the most point of interest around the character, and everything else is kind of left out, more neutral and more ambient-like. So I have neutral ambient-like blue color in the background. I have sort of yellow color to create this hue contrast with blue, and that's also bringing your eye more towards the character as well. So all those things are built in a way so that you look at the character first. So once I have my spotlight direction set, I will light my scene and think about how the shadows will work in that scene with that in mind. So if the light is in front of the character itself will cast shadows on the car. And because the car is crumbled and the shape is kind of irregular, thus the shadow itself gonna be irregular around the character. The second light source I have is the ambient light. So spotlight, that's coming from the front, and then the ambient light, which is coming from everywhere around. The strongest ambient light I have in my scene is the ambient light that is coming from the back of the car, which is the blue color. And as I was mentioning before, the way I look at lights and the way I look at the surfacing of everything is I want to make sure that it's affecting my environment realistically. So for instance, the blue color that's in the ambient, I want to make sure that it's going to affect the metal surface of the car, and it will create reflections, proper reflections on top of the car. And I also added some blue highlights, or almost like this blue spill on the character itself. So like on her arms and her hair and neck, you will see that there's a little blue tint. It just basically means that the surface of her skin and the hair surface and the metal arm itself is kind of reflecting this blue ambient color as well. I didn't go as far as working on the color of the pants. It would probably reflect more of the blue color itself. Just generally working on the light so that I make sure that the lighting is somewhat consistent around the scene. This little trick you're looking at here, by the way, is called Puppet Warp. That's a little tool available in the Photoshop CS 6 and the Photoshop CC, which allows you to create a little grid around the character and almost makes it's almost like this more controllable way of doing a liquify. And I use it to kind of control the character and maybe change some of um, the limb lengths, and you can actually use it to rotate some elements as well. So it's a really good deformation tool. Um, anyway, coming back to lighting, so I make sure that my ambient lighting works well, that I have my source light, the point light, the spotlight, directional light in my scene, and that those are balancing each other, so that spotlight will be the strongest light, and then the ambient light will be not so strong. I don't want to have it fighting my spotlight and creating unnecessary contrast where it's not needed. So I usually, I'm talking about light, by the way, towards the end. That's something I should mention in the beginning. But when I create my composition, I always have an idea where the lighting is going to be coming from. It's pretty important also because before you start searching for references, you kind of want to have in your head, want to have in your mind what the scene gonna be like and what's the lighting gonna be like. It's actually extremely important to have a good idea what kind of lighting you want to work with. At least have a direction of the light, which direction it's gonna come from, and at least have the source of that light. It's important because if you're supposed to work with the photo textures, your photo textures already have the lighting information embedded in it. And if you use the wrong photos to build or sort of bash things together, you might end up with having something that has several light directions coming from different areas, and creating this mismatch of lights and making everything really hard to read. So here I just made sure that the face that I used and the hair or the head in general had same lighting information as the chest, or similar lighting information as the chest, similar lighting information as the robotic arm, as the hands, and well, pants are very reflective in general, and they are not being hit by the spotlight that much. So I didn't have to care about the directionality of light that much. Basically, very reflective surfaces, and especially black reflective surfaces. There's you kind of want to have, obviously, you kind of want to have some good directionality in it, but if it's off slightly bit, it's not gonna be as distracting as or as obvious as on matte surfaces. Matte surfaces usually reflect the light and create and show the form through the light way more than reflective surfaces, because reflective surfaces in fact just reflect way more information that is coming from around the environment, and they don't scatter the light so much, so they are not creating, it's actually harder to read the shape of the reflective surface than it is to read the shape of the matte surface. So yeah, so just making sure that the textures are somewhat in the good lighting, all of them. If one texture is like if the angle of light is a little different, or if the color of light is not perfect, it's fine, because you can always sort of use adjustment layers to help yourself and work with the lighting on that specific texture. And also you can like overpaint and change some hues. and it's going to be much easier to fix something that is close to what you want to have, rather than having something that doesn't have that has like opposite lighting or totally different lighting. That texture usually is not going to be useful at all, with exception to textures that are shot in diffuse lighting, so like overcast, or something that doesn't have sharp shadows, or very 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 diffuse shadows. And it's much easier to control that, because you can always use your adjustment layers to fake the light. It's gonna look more fake though, so I rather want to just, again, search for textures that I know gonna work 100%. So my directional lighting, my ambient lighting, textures that kind of follow both the principles, and then just kind of putting everything together and cleaning it up. Um, it's the fastest way that I've noticed, and probably the easiest way to control what you're gonna end up with in your painting, in terms of like how efficient it is time wise, and what are the results that you're gonna be coming up with after say 2-3 hours of painting. So once I'm kind of happy with how the general lighting works in my scene, and once most of the details are cleaned up enough, I'll start, or what I meant is like how the readability works, so that my character is in the focus, that the car and the environment is not taking away from that focus too much. Everything is nicely framed. I'll start working on the details that I might have missed. So kind of go through the image and look at what I can add to make it even more interesting. So what I figured out here, what's gonna make it more interesting? What about adding sunglasses? I mean, it's pretty cliche to think about. Oh, okay, cyberpunk, chick with the gun, sunglasses. But in fact, it kind of works, because it's just adding this little of that cheesy 80s badass feel to a character. You know, like in 80s, almost every badass character had like dark sunglasses, no matter what scenario it was that in. Like if it was night or day, or inside a club or outside, or whatever the reason, they always had sunglasses on. So that's kind of what I wanted to do here. Put the sunglasses on the character. Also, like there's a little simple story you can always tell about that as well. Like, hey, what if those glasses have some specific purpose? They are not just only for the looks, but also for just function. So for now, when I'm painting those or bashing those in Photoshop, I'm not really focusing on the function that much, but later on, once you start thinking about iterations, there might be some slight detail that you're gonna add that will kind of explain the function. So imagine if for whatever reason I would start painting some digital numbers or projections that are visible on the glass surface. That could indicate that the character itself is using that to calculate distance, or to use it as an informative tool to prepare for better actions. Almost sort of like what RoboCop would do when assessing the crime scene, and kind of targeting bad guys, and then just like using pre-targeted auto aim system. So that could be one idea. The other idea would be just, hey, maybe she's so fucking good, she's actually watching some film in the meantime and not really giving a flying damn about what's happening around. So you can tell whatever story from that little detail. Also, it can just be this additional detail that you might elaborate later on. So what would the actual character design be later on, where once you have your illustration, your character illustration, and you have your sort of general idea what the character is, you can start picking the elements that you've painted in your illustration and kind of make sort of call outs of what those things are. Um, for instance, if we would take this character and put it in just a regular standing pose, that's how you would probably think about designing costumes, for example. Um, we could then pick and make like a close up to a face, and and show how the glasses look on the face in more rendered way, and then maybe you could take those glasses off and design the way they look so that they could be actually produced. So someone could you know, either print them out or build them from materials and whatnot, and maybe they would have built-in display or something that could be either built or that could be actually made in most cases actually in films that would be done digitally. But the glasses itself, they could be still built, and they could have like markers for better tracking, so that once they once the VFX crew would start putting some sort of UI elements, they would be tracked on that you know, surface. So little things like that, even just like putting glasses will kind of help story wise. And that's just one thing about the character illustration, that because you're not really focusing on those specific elements from the get-go, you're kind of creating an illustration itself, and you want to have a broad strokes done. Um, it just having this whole illustration done, where there's just quite a few elements in. You can kind of like with a matter of minutes, you can just kind of add a little element here and there, and make the character slightly more interesting without spending too much time, without making sure that everything is pixel perfect. Just add a little detail, paint something real quick, and then later on it's a good information that can be used for the character development. So simple sunglasses can, you know, you can tell a lot of stories from there. You can actually have a pretty cool run with the concept where you're designing the glasses itself, designing how they're attached. Maybe if she's a robot or cyborg, maybe she's not just putting the glasses on normally. Maybe their glasses are actually coming from inside her head. Maybe it's a part of the body itself. They're like folding out from back of the head or something. There's just, you know, simple shape added on top of a character, and even though it doesn't tell you much about the character itself in the beginning, in this illustration, for example, you can kind of come up with quite a few ideas of how to use that little few painted pixels and almost elaborate to a folder of concept designs that can bring even more depth to or more cool factor to how your character is gonna look like. So, you know, always good to kind of add things and think about little details here and there, and how they can affect your overall design, and how you can actually go from there and elaborate from there to create you know, awesome designs later on. So almost all elements of this painting are in, and just 10 minutes left. Uh, it's really just at this point just kind of going through the image and searching for things that can be improved. Usually spending that extra couple of minutes after you're kind of happy with all the elements that are in and all the overpaints, sort of like most of the overpaints are in, you just kind of get give yourself like this extra 10-15 minutes to kind of finish it up, add little extra touches here and there, and just to make sure that everything again works nicely with each other. So that might be anything from starting from changing saturation of your specific elements, or um, working on the little details, or reframing slightly so, and doing a little crop here and there. See, just kind of experimenting and see what works and what doesn't. You'll sometimes find yourself on doing little overpaints here and there that might just not work. But again, it's just a couple of extra minutes that not gonna affect you that much. So one thing that I was missing from the image is that she's in the fight. She's you know being thrown into this car or something. What if that person that threw her into that car also like started shooting at her? So you'd have some bullet holes around, and maybe a bullet hole going through the chest, and then there's a liquid coming out. Uh, so just kind of working little brush strokes here and there. Nothing too fancy. Don't spend too much time on that stuff. Just experiment, see if it's a worth a while, and if not, you can always kind of roll back to a point where you felt happy with your image. But usually, what I've noticed is that even though I feel like the image is there, just kind of like putting this extra brush strokes, extra kind of like dots, and maybe some lines or something that will kind of make it even more interesting. Um, One technical tip that I was doing quite a lot when you looked at the if you looked at the whole process is I was flipping the image a lot. So I would use a shortcut for that. I You can go in Photoshop keyboard shortcuts and kind of work on that, and kind of create your own shortcuts, if you will. And the shortcut I used here is Control Alt Shift and A for horizontal flip, and then same combination but with Q for a vertical flip. Um, the way it works is you're flipping the image back and forth, and thus it's easier to spot what's wrong with your composition. So mirror image will help you to spot areas of the composition that don't work too well. And the reason being is that because when you work on your image and you look at it all the time from one angle, your eye is getting used to it quite fast, and you might kind of lose perspective on where the balance of the details should be in, and some areas of the might be having too many details, and others might be lacking details, and you might just end up having something that you're not entirely happy with. But if you flip the image back and forth, and thus like if you create yourself a good shortcut as you remember it and it's easily accessible, and it's going to be much easier to control your general composition, and make sure that there are no striking errors that just kind of make your life harder, and your composition not working too well. So just a tip that I found almost every good artist that is out there is using that to their painting. They're just flipping back and forth, and it's just like it just really works. It's just it sounds like an easy thing, but yeah, it is. It just is, and it works. So a couple of extra touches, just here and there, um, kind of like just rearranging the layers and switching them on and off, and For instance, the bullet holes were a bit too regular, so I'm kind of like painting out some detail, making them less regular and fake looking. Again, small things like that. You might think you're adding extra detail, and then you realize that it's too choppy or like too crude, and it's just taking away from the way you read the image, especially when you have photo textures in it. It's even more important to kind of keep some of the painted strokes sharper, especially for like bullet holes and things that are creating additional contrast. So just like making sure that those things are working nicely. One thing I like to do also is flatten or create a layer that merges all the layers and creates a new layer on top of your image. You do it by pressing Shift Control Alt E. That should be by default the shortcut for the Photoshop. And what I like to do, especially in the image that is being photo bashed and is just a sketch, is just I want to kind of mask some of the areas, kind of blur them out here and there, create this like uneven effect. Maybe like imagining that if it was painted, then maybe the paint would smudge in those areas. It's just kind of like dirty sort of trick. Where you just kind of smudge one area and then you paint that out. So you use your eraser and paint that out, and because it's a top layer, then your all of the bottom layers will kind of come true and like go through, and your new smudges will also have like more sharper and regular edges. So that's kind of adding to kind of unifying the image. Second thing I do is I usually add noise towards the end. It's a very simple trick. It's just kind of like the way it works is just like when you add noise, you're actually taking away some detail, and some edges will lose on sharpness. And it's not a bad thing when you want to have a quick sketch and you're using photos. There is a lot of sharp edges that might come from higher resolution photos, and you just kind of want to have everything to be unified and working pretty well. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and that's the final image. As you can see, it took us around an hour and 40-ish minutes. It's a very short amount of time. If you consider having full-time work where you're just designing characters or just designing illustrations for your new project, your new film, you can do 3 or 4 of those illustrations within a day. And that will give you, towards the end of the day, it will give you some really good base for your supervisor to look at and like say, hey, I like this keyframe, or hey, this keyframe really fucking sucks. And if you just only have one picture for him to look at, it's gonna be harder because you only literally just have to hit the mark. If you have several images, it's better, even though they're not gonna look so amazing. They're not gonna look so nicely rendered. They're still gonna give you your supervisor options to choose from. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed listening to my Eastern European voice for last hour and 40 minutes, and there's going to be more videos, more tutorials related to that topic coming soon, and just stay tuned. Leave some feedback on Facebook. You can follow me on facebook.com, and then there slash Maciej Kuciara, MACIEJ KUCIARA, and just leave feedback about this. What do you think? And if you liked it or not. If you think it sucked, then just tell me. I'll try to improve, and I'll try to kind of follow through and we'll talk about some more specific things in the next video tutorials. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed it.